Hey everybody, just wanted to throw a little information out here as far as the connections I see between a couple different levels of this latest round of Patreon controversy. And it has to do with the banning of Sargon. At this point, you're probably familiar with it if you're watching this video. And at this point, all I'm really doing is trying to point out how any kind of power structure attempts to use the fact that you can make or receive a payment as a form of control. And this isn't just going on at the level of the internet, of the PayPals and Patreons of the world. The idea of using a method of payment or receiving a payment as a method of control goes back a long way. It's a fear that's basically built into any society that has specialized to the point where you're dependent on a market to survive, and we're talking about basic level stuff, that if you're ostracized by the local guilds in the in the ancient age, and you can't buy boots and you can't sell your corn in the market or whatever it is you have to sell, then you're just screwed. So there's this kind of built-in fear to civilized society of being economically ostracized from the group at large. And so payment systems become this tyrannical tool of control, that if you can control the payment systems, then you can dictate behavior if the people want to survive. And this isn't, like I was saying, this isn't just going on at the level of Patreon. Patreon, at the end of the day, is kind of a small fish, tip of the spear situation that a lot of, I don't want to say less aware, but just people who don't think in historical kind of geopolitical circles most of the time, that they might be more concerned about local politics, or they might be more concerned about censorship or culture, gaming culture, or any of the things that Sargon touches, because he goes all the way back to Gamersgate. You're dealing with a more casual group of people when it comes to the politics. Their heart might be in the right place, but the level of background knowledge and information isn't necessarily going to be the same in these groups of people that are basically new to the fight, that are trying to figure out why a system like this would come in place, that they haven't even thought about it. Or in fact, this is something that's been going on a long time, and I'm going to start giving you some examples of what's been going on. Back during the Obama administration in the United States, there was this thing called Operation Choke Point. And what Operation Choke Point did is they created this big list of industries that, while not illegal, the Obama administration just didn't like them. And, there was some stuff on there that was pretty shady, that you probably wouldn't want to be involved with. I wouldn't want to be involved with personally, but at the same time, it's one or the other, right? Either the practice is illegal and you can't do it, or it's legal, and if you don't like it, call your congressman. That's your two choices. This intermediate kind of gray area where we're going to use informal powers to threaten banking intermediaries to cut off your bank account or cut off your payment processing because we don't like you, and we'd like to see you get out of business, but we can't ban you because we don't have the votes right now, or we don't like the optics that it would look like if we were using the heavy hand of the government to ban you. Then I'll get they're getting kind of wishy-washy and extra legal by operating in that area. So I'll find the list of the full list of industries, because some of them, they were trying to put payday loan lenders out, and they were trying to put, the thing that upset me the most was that a lot of them on there were like gun stores. That it was like an obvious attack on the Second Amendment, that they were basically making it impossible to operate a gun store in the United States, even if you were, you have to go through all of these licenses and background checks and whatnot to become a gun dealer in the United States to begin with. But here they were trying to shut down, informally do an end run around the Constitution and shut down gun stores by using legal power of the government to threaten banks. And basically, at the heart of this is the collusion between the banking system and the government. And honestly, if there's one thing that I could do to help the government as improve society as it currently stands, is to try to get the government and the banking system separated from each other again. Primarily the idea of a government that has a government/banking system with the combined authority to create as much money out of thin air as it wants to at any given time, and then to distribute that money to whoever they want behind the scenes without any formal voting process, or not even formal voting process. It's just it's not in the open at all. There's no transparency to, when the Federal Reserve decides to create a few $1 trillion and hand it to the banking system and then pay them interest on that money that they just handed them, then you're dealing with a crony capitalist system. You're dealing with a corrupt system. But that's just one example. Another example of another level where this is operating is in the banking system itself, because banks have a tremendous amount of power because they are part of the money creation process. That effectively, when money goes into a bank, they can, based on the amount of reserves that they have to have, which changes on the day by day, but it's generally around 10%. So basically, you put in a certain amount of money, and the way these banks interact, it effectively creates a money supply that is 9 times larger than the basic amount of money supply. Because what happens is, you go put money in the bank, you think you still have that money, and they loan out 90% of the money, and that guy goes puts it in another bank, he thinks he has the money, and they loan out 81% of your money out to another person, and it just keeps going and going and going like that until effectively there's about 9 times more money in the system. So you are part of a legally privileged class in the United States, or anywhere where there's a fractional reserve system, if you're part of the banking system. So, how many new banks have been created since 2008, since we had the financial crisis? Well, in the United States, the answer is none. That there's so much regulation, that there's so much cronyism, that there has been effectively no growth in the banking system since then. What we've seen is massive consolidation as more and more banks are getting gobbled up and put into the hands of fewer and fewer of these mega banks. And so there's another system where payment of control of the payment system, since they have the regulations, since you have to get a charter from the government to open a bank. You can't just advertise online, hey guys, I've got some money I'd like to lend, and I want to charge 5% for it. And oh yeah, if you want to deposit money with me, I'll pay you money on that interest. No. Oh no. If you open up a banking institution, prepare for the shitstorm and prepare to have like a legal team. You got to be a multi-billionaire already to open a bank in America. But it keeps going, because this also happens in the international arena. Because if you haven't heard of the SWIFT system is a system where banks exchange money with each other internationally. If you are dumb enough to send money to your Nigerian relative who just died so you can inherit the money that they left you, when you go down to the bank, you're sending a bank wire. And that bank wire goes through the SWIFT system. It's international. It's headquartered in Brussels. And it's primarily dominated by the United States and Europe. So when somebody does something naughty that they don't like on the international stage, whether it's buying Iranian oil or working with North Korea for anything, or being nice to Russia for any reason, like, please, you're not starting World War III hard enough with Russia, so we're going to kick you out of the SWIFT system. Basically, anybody they don't like internationally, they kick out of the SWIFT system. So if you are a business person or a country and you've committed some kind of grave sin against the international banking order, and you haven't, but you're in a local institution where you can't be physically arrested and absconded with and tortured, then they cut you out of the banking system. It's a very similar system of control. And what this comes down to is it's going to come to you on an individual level, not like Sargon of Akkad, where he's being controlled on the basis of his politics, that, and really, the Sargon thing, Sargon is a liberal. Sargon is a welfare state liberal. I'm more libertarian, and he's reasonable. I could sit across the table from Sargon and we could have an argument, and he's got enough of a brain rolling around between his ears that if I made the argument to him that here's how much money we bring in, here's how much of a welfare state we can afford, and by the way, would you like to think on the corrupting effects of a welfare state and the creation of a permanent dependent class on society, and maybe that's not a good idea. Me and Sargon, we could probably come up with a number as to what's appropriate, because there's always an appropriate number. Don't let these absolutists make you think that there is a libertarian absolutist like an anarcho-capitalist. I appreciate their resolve, but at some point you have to get this number down, and the number is that at some point it's cheaper to buy off dissident people than it is to fight them. And that's how you determine their number. Do I want to hire thousands of new police officers, or do I want to throw them a few breadcrumbs so that they can continue in their drug-induced, alcohol-induced laziness and stupidness? And yes, in a crisis, I might not be able to. I might literally be able to say, dude, no, society right now, we're so far behind, we're so fucked up, we need productivity so desperately that we can't afford a big welfare state. And as long as the numbers are out there, that's just how life is. If you are literally doing absolutely nothing to support yourself as a living being, then you are completely at the mercy of other people. But that's kind of a side tangent. I was just kind of illustrating that Sargon is not this alt-right, right-wing crazy guy that the media tries to make him out to be. The reason why he got banned in the first place, and you probably already know this, is he used a racial slur against neo-Nazis, against literal neo-Nazis, white supremacists, so that they could understand in their own language how they were wrong. That basically Sargon is based on a meritocracy. He's based on the idea of meritocracy. And he went to them and said, look, you guys are literally an embodiment of the things that you claim to hate. And that got him banned. But basically, here's the point I was originally going to make about this coming down to you on the individual level eventually. And basically what it comes down to is the war on cash. The goal of the banking system is to get a digital fence around everyone, 100% control digital fence based on one of these systems, right? Because right now, if you love Sargon of Akkad, you can get a handy-dandy envelope, disguise it well with a Happy New Year card or whatever the coming holiday is, and you can stick $10 or $50 or however many pounds into that envelope and send it to him, and he will be able to use cash to exchange for goods and services so that he will not die due to lack of food or housing or heat or whatever it is that you would run out of first in southern England. Probably security. Anyway, cash is a method of exchange that, yeah, it can be subverted. You can subvert a paper currency. It's a lot harder to subvert a paper currency than it is to subvert a bank account. So what they want is a 100% digital banking system where all payments, 100% of payments, have to be gone through some kind of large mega bank that's basically inseparable from the government, that's too big to fail, that doesn't have any kind of accounting standards that they have to hold to, because at least in the United States, based on the Exchange Stabilization Act, it is actually legal for the government to allow companies to falsify their records, their financial records, if the government decides that for national security reasons, it's important that they be allowed to falsify their records. That basically means there are two sets of books for every bank in the United States. There's the forward-facing accounts, books that the public can see, and then there are the rear-facing accounts that only the insiders and the government can see. And really, those books don't matter because they can produce infinite money and hand it to themselves anytime they want. So what they want you to do is get you at the mercy of this system. You know, you, Joe Blow, you have to work and exchange something of value for your currency, and then they want to reward you with worthless currency that they can generate and put in a banking system and devalue at any time. And they want to be able to track every single purchase that you make, and then they will be able to pontificate on high as to whether those purchases are good purchases or bad purchases. And whether those purchases are good or bad will always be based on what is good for their interests, what's good for the banking system's interests. So basically, if you are doing too much business at a company that they've identified on their naughty list, on their Operation Choke Point list, you might get a little letter in the mail that says, you know, we don't like these folks, and we've notified them, and you have a lot of associations with them, and you're on our warning list. You're on our Chinese credit system. Big Brother is watching social credit score, and your score is kind of low. We don't like you right now. And they could take it a step further. That, you know, basically every single person, from the guy who brings you your stocks your shelves at Walmart for minimum wage or $1 more than minimum wage, up to, you know, past people like Sargon, to doctors and lawyers. You know, are you doing anything controversial? You know, are you not doing abortions? Are you not accepting federal insurance? You know, anything along those lines, that they will have this new subtle method of control. And I say it's subtle, but it's not very subtle, because literally it's the power of life and death. If you don't have the means to take income in and buy provisions, if you are completely deprived of that ability, you're basically dead. You're basically ostracized from society. You can't hold any kind of position. And this, they want everyone, through the banning of cash, to be in the same position that Sargon of Akkad is in, by having a large portion of his income being dependent on a middleman through Patreon. And we know that chain goes not just from Patreon, it goes to the major payment processors, which goes to the major banks, which goes to the government. Because all of those entities are one long chain that represent the same entity and represents the same interests. You might argue with me at that point, but really all of those entities go together. They're really, one takes orders from the other. Patreon is getting pressure from MasterCard, and MasterCard at some point, if they want to stay in business, they can't start suddenly doing a bunch of stuff that the Federal Reserve doesn't like and the big banks don't like, and the big banks and the government are basically the same thing. So that's the ultimate goal here, is that this should be a warning to you that if Sargon of Akkad, with his very mellow, very, actually kind of progressive message, and he used some naughty words against the alt-right, that was enough to literally sever his connection from society that allows him to live, to literally send him out in the desert, to banish him from society, to force him to collect resources on his own without being involved in civilized society. That's the war on cash. And if you want some developments on the war on cash, just go and look at what the largest denomination of bills that used to be available. I mean, back in the day in the United States, they used to have $1,000 bills and $10,000 bills. Most people didn't use them because they were for the banking system. If you were a big bank, you didn't want a giant vault filled with $1 bills, right? If it's just your reserves, you might have had hundreds of millions of dollars back in the day. So you had $1,000 bills instead of $100 bills. Then you could have a vault that was 10 times smaller, right? That makes sense. But the government didn't like this because the government can't track those purchases. So yeah, people had a right to privacy. So if you go and buy a soda that's too sugary for the local government, if you bought it with cash, they wouldn't know. It would be hard to track you down. But if you buy it with a debit card, the government and the bank are the same institutions. So Mayor Bloomberg or one of his cronies down in New York can sit you down in front of the new Big Brother Trust and Safety Board in your local community, and they can say, you know what, guys, your social score, your Big Brother score, your progressive score is not high enough. I have these receipts here from you buying these sugary drinks, and we don't like that. That's not the ideals that we represent. And you went down to Bob's hardware store. Bob was mean to a transgendered person yesterday. Bob did not address them by their preferred pronoun. And it looks like you go to Bob's hardware store all the time. Are you a white supremacist? Are you an anarcho-capitalist? Because we're going to put this informal, illegal pressure on you, and we're going to restrict your fundamental right to trade, to do business. And that's what they want. They want that pressure. They don't want to use violent force because people understand the violent force at a visceral level. It's why they do sneaky things. It's not that the force of government has gone away. Government just keeps getting smarter about how they use force. Because if the government just sends the troops out in the streets and starts machine gunning people, that's old hat. We've seen that. Then you get stuff like the yellow vests in France. Because the yellow vests started off because of direct taxation. People understand direct taxation. It's the government taking your money and not giving it to you and using it for something else. And most people understand that once the money goes into the government, you're not going to get your money back out at the same rate. You're going to lose a bunch of it to bureaucrats, you're going to lose a bunch of it to graft and corruption, and by the time it actually gets to the people it's supposedly supposed to help or the roads it's supposed to build, you're getting a few cents on the dollar back when you go through that process. So basically, They want to get you completely on that system so they can control you. Direct taxation, if they do high taxes, people get angry. So what do? Inflation. If all of your money has to be in an account, then they can do negative interest rates. And I'm sorry if negative interest rates is a financial concept that's a little bit tougher for you to understand. But the idea is people already have inflation. I mean, prices go up. Just imagine anything when you were younger. How much did stuff cost? It's probably more now, with the exception of like iPods and like digital gadgets. Almost everything, food, housing, college education, healthcare, all of it is more expensive. And it's not necessarily because there's less of it available. It's not a supply and demand situation. Well, it is a supply and demand situation. The thing that is more abundant is money. And see, you kind of understand if your boss asks you to take a pay cut, you're like, what the hell? I'm going to do the same work and I'm going to do it for less pay? You're like, what the hell? That's not right. But if what happens is behind the scene, the boss is like, you know what, it's been a tough year, so we're only going to give you a small raise. We're going to give you a 1% raise. But if prices went up 3% that year, what your boss really just handed you was a 2% pay cut. But he was able to do it without triggering most of you. Most of you are ignorant of this process. So basically, the more people that are ringed into this digital fence, the more people that don't know about, having real assets like gold and silver or learning about various cryptocurrencies, the more of you that are in that system, the more of you that can be controlled and sheared, that can be, taken advantage of. You're not going to wake up like the Yellow Vest people through the direct tax. You're not going to wake up because it's not a direct use of violence against the system against you, because we've already had revolutions for those things. We understand those things. We know how to take down those people. But do you know how to stop this problem? That's why everybody is talking about this problem, because Jordan Peterson and Rubin, they're like, well, we need a new payment processor. Well, is it going to work? Is our PayPal and MasterCard and Visa and the big banks, will they allow another formal payment processor to exist that can face them on equal terms? Because if they allow that to exist as a legal entity, they're screwed. There's absolutely nothing they can do, because nobody would want to be involved with PayPal now, right? PayPal started out as a safety mechanism. You're like, YouTube's a little bit scary. YouTube's a little bit more too progressive, a little bit too PC with the concerns about their advertisers. We need a backup method. And Patreon's like, yeah, we'll be your backup method. Get people to give you money through us every month. And people were relieved, like, here's Patreon, they become Save the Day. And then now, a few months later, Patreon is worse than YouTube. Patreon just shows up one day, takes your statements out of context, and you're gone. You're in the desert. You are wandering the desert. Outcast from society. Because they don't like you. They believe in their progressive ideology. They don't care how unrealistic that ideology is. And they don't care. They are happy you are outcast. They are happy they have this method of control over you now. The only way we can move forward as a free society is by having free trade. That means the right of individuals to exchange and transact cannot be allowed to be monopolized by a few people who want to enshrine their own power and use it as a blunt instrument to enforce their own ideology. That is not what you call a free society. That's what you call a tyranny. That's what you call a dictatorship. And yes, they are using a softer method of control. Nobody from Patreon is going down to Carl Benjamin's house and clubbing him over the head. Nobody is going to Carl Benjamin's house and taking his furniture and rousting him out of bed and, stealing his big screen or whatever, because that would be too obvious. But shutting him down this way, making him unable to spread his message, unable to make a living, promoting the same kind of ideas, or at least most of the same kind of ideas I am, the only reason they would do that is because they do not want a free society. They want to be in control. They want to approve and disapprove. Have a checklist of approved ideas and disapproved ideas. And the approved ideas will support them in power, and the disapproved ideas are anything that will not support them in power. These are just criminals looking for a new, subtle way to control the rest of us. And unless you can get on the ball and start learning about these systems of control that banks use, that governments use to steal the siphon money away, real productive effort away from you, to hidden parts of the system that they control through inflation, through currency creation. Now we're getting into direct manipulation of who is allowed to work and who is not allowed to work, based on these inclusions and removals from payment processing systems. Unless you take action now, take action to protect yourself now, support these cases to build alternative systems, because to be perfectly honest, I don't know if that's going to happen, if they're going to allow that to happen. We have to try and see if we're still going to be allowed to have a free market in the free world, in the supposedly free world. We have to try. So support Peterson and Rubin and anybody else who wants to set up an alternative system. Yeah, watch out for scam artists, because anybody who is down, somebody else will try to kick you while you're down and get a little something for yourself too. Keep your eyes open. But at the same time, if you want to live in a free society, we can't accept this situation to stand. Go learn about real assets. Go learn about cryptocurrencies. Go learn about gold and silver. Because if your wealth is completely an imaginary form, if it's in the bank, it's electrons. They can decide you can't have that anymore. Somebody from the government can get up on TV as easily as a guy from Patreon and say, so-and-so is a bad guy. We don't like him. He doesn't represent our ideology. Therefore, we're seizing all of his assets. And it's easy to do this electronically. You're not just immune. You're not just vulnerable to corruption. I mean, you're vulnerable to ideology. Yes, like Patreon, like the Patreon situation. You're also available to just a plain old corruption, because these companies, I won't say any specific brokerage, but imagine just your generic electronic stock trading platform. I'm going to say the one that actually went broke. The one that actually went broke was MF Global. And say you've got your retirement funds in there. You've got your life savings in there. You're trading stocks. You're trading bonds. Because you think, or maybe your 401k guy is. They're using some intermediary to handle your life savings in a 401k. Maybe you know nothing about finance, but your financial institutions are taking risky bets. Well, if all of your money is controlled in electronic forms by one idiot or a handful of idiots that can do something stupid, you can be screwed too. And yeah, the government can try to fly in and bail people out, but when they do that, they're either taking money from somebody else, which is violence, or they're creating new money, which is stealing purchasing power from people, which makes prices increase, which is watering down, which is basically making you do more work for less pay. Inflation is making you do more work for less pay, unless your pay goes up by an equal amount. And your pay never, or very rarely, goes up more than the rate of inflation goes up. So that's their goal, folks. It doesn't stop at punishing Carl Benjamin for being naughty and not towing a progressive line. You know, it's not because he won't fuck a tranny. Okay? That's not where it's part of that, but that's where it stops. It starts. It keeps going. They want all of you in a 100% system like this. No cash, no barter, no informal trade, no ability to send stuff from one person to another that isn't tracked, taxed, and controlled by these systems. That's where we end up if we continue allowing these kind of systems to go forward. So I implore you, if you've got more questions, if you want to know some other people you can learn from to talk about, because yeah, I've studied history, I've studied economics, I've studied energy systems, but I'm just a guy in his mid-30s that has been paying attention to this stuff since before 2008, and have gotten a little bit ahead of the curve. Not much. I'm a working class stooge, okay? But because I'm aware I'm not getting fleeced, I can position myself so that not only at the end of the day, I at least have a little something when I put in my 40 or 50 hour week, you know, at the end of the day. Ask me some questions if you've got questions. Criticize me if you think this isn't the pattern. If you've got substantial criticism, just don't call me an ass face, okay? I don't give a shit. You're just some troll on the internet if that's all you've got to say. I want you guys to be protected. I don't want you to be in a situation like Sargon. Sargon has been a public figure, so he's probably gotten smaller doses of this, but even he said he didn't expect to be the martyr on this one, that he kind of expected somebody edgier, somebody more, you know, out there on the edge of wackiness would eventually have the rug pulled out from under them. You know, kind of like Laura Southern. Laura Southern was out there on a boat. Not that I don't have a certain degree of sympathy for her, but when you go out and start taking direct action, Laura Southern should have already been prepared for those systems to abandon her. Sargon, with what he did, there's no reasonable expectation for him to be tossed into the desert the way he was. And the main thing is, I want you guys to be prepared, because they're not stopping at Sargon. They're coming for all of us. They want all of us in the digital pen, so that we will be digital sheep and digital in the digital pen. That they will have 100% control over how we're paid. We'll be getting paid on prepaid debit cards. You won't have a choice. You will, every purchase you make will be subject to their approval or decline. You will not be able to purchase alternative payments. You will not be able to operate outside of approved purchases. If they're not in network, you will not be allowed to make purchases. This is their end goal. You will not be able to hand somebody a $5 bill for a latte. When you swipe your card, you'll be allowed to have a latte if they're in network. You know, if it's a Starbucks latte. If it's Joe, who was mean to a tranny the other day because the tranny came in and demanded arbitrarily to have respect, unearned respect, then Joe's coffee shop is not an approved place to buy anymore. They want this system of control. If you want to know more, ask more. I've got people who can tell you this stuff better than I can once you get down into the weeds. I'm out. Later.